Cedar Ridge was never meant for the hurried, nor for those who found their way by following signs. It was a place tucked deep between towering, ancient pines, where scattered wooden roofs rested like quiet thoughts upon the rolling hills, and where a winding gravel path carved its way through solitude, leading to a place the locals called Caleb's Silence. The man who lived there didn't choose loneliness as much as he chose breath, the kind of breath that didn't fight the air for room, but simply existed. In that hand-built cabin, weathered by time and silence, Caleb once lived a different life, one marked by a badge, a family, and a fragile belief that broken things could still be mended if held gently enough. Caleb Walker had once been a firefighter, but not the kind whose faces smile from magazine covers or wave from evening news features. He was the kind who stepped into flames when others backed away, the kind who entered when windows screamed orange and smoke clung to ceilings like death's veil. His ash-gray eyes had seen far too much, collapsing beams, hands locked tight even in death, voices silenced mid-scream. He had saved lives. He had lost them. And far too many nights, he had knelt in the ashes of a failed rescue with no witness but the soot in his lungs and the weight in his chest. Then came the accident, a fire like any other, except this one took the only thing Caleb couldn't fight for, the woman he had loved without armor. He didn't leave the department right away. He tried. He kept showing up. But with every alarm, every time he slipped back into the heavy suit and helmet, he could hear her, whispering in his ear like a ghost wrapped in smoke. He stopped sleeping. And one night, with no farewell, no ceremony, Caleb left his badge on a desk and walked away. He never looked back. People said he lost his mind, that the man who came out of the flames wasn't the one who went in. But Caleb no longer owed anyone an explanation. He bought a stretch of forgotten land from a retired horse rancher, rebuilt the barn with his own hands, dug a new well beneath the frozen dirt, and vanished into a world without phones, without internet, without footsteps at the door, just wind through pine and the hum of firewood when the frost set in. In town, his name lingered like smoke, half myth, half memory. But to Caleb, this wasn't an escape. This was survival. Distilled. They said he lived alone. That wasn't quite true. Beneath the shade of those massive pines stood a kennel, broad and clean beyond belief, cared for with such reverence it felt more like a sanctuary than a shelter. But there were no horses here, no sheep or goats. Inside lived 14 German shepherds, proud, striking creatures with squared shoulders, watchful eyes, and the stance of soldiers ready for a war long over. Not a single one of them was normal. Each had been discarded, branded too dangerous, too broken, too wild to be worth saving. Some were former K-9 units discharged for aggression. Others were strays, so far gone they'd forgotten how it felt to be called by name. A few had been starved past hope, their eyes emptied of trust. And yet, somehow, they had found their way here. Or perhaps Caleb had found them in this place where the abandoned were given one last chance to relearn the language of living. Caleb didn't keep them as pets. He didn't train them like handlers do. He spoke to them, through silence, through presence, through gestures too soft for the human eye to catch. Every morning, before the light broke the mist, Caleb would step into the yard and let out a single, gentle whistle, a sound that felt more like memory than command. 14 shadows emerged without a word, forming 2 lines, still as prayer. Athena, the lead female, always stepped out first, her ears sharply pointed, her gait fluid like a jungle cat. Behind her came Titan, massive and solemn, his coat black as night, his eyes ice-sharp, but both would lower their heads the moment Caleb raised his hand, not out of fear, but from reverence. To Caleb, every dog was a fractured soul, but like him, They had not crumbled to dust. They were merely waiting for someone quiet enough, patient enough, broken enough to touch what remained without flinching. And in that cabin of weathered wood and memory, something impossible had taken root. The forgotten became family. Every meal was divided equally. Every wound was cleaned by hand. Every night terror was met by an old, calloused palm resting steadily on trembling fur. Caleb did not speak much, but the dogs heard him, in the rhythm of his steps, in the even weight of his breath, in the quiet presence of a man who had survived fire and refused to burn others in return. By day, Cedar Ridge moved with rhythm and resolve. But when the sun dipped behind the ridge, spilling its purples over the yard and folding shadows over the porch, the land exhaled into a slower kind of stillness, the kind that feels like a half-forgotten song echoing across time. Caleb would sit in his old chair, a chipped mug of cold tea in hand. His eyes didn't see the world so clearly anymore, but he knew every curve of the hills, every whistle of wind through the siding, by heart. Silence here was not a choice. It was the law of the land, not heavy, but haunting, as though every sound had been gently folded into grief and packed away with care. And in that silence, memories rose louder than voices ever could. Blaze, his first dog, and the last to love him before the others came, had once lain at his feet on that very porch, head pressed gently to his knee, anchoring him through night after night of choking dreams. That dog had seen it all, the fire that tore through the life Caleb once had. The night he screamed over his wife's body, throat raw and hollow. The weeks when no word crossed his lips, only the sound of breath and bone. And Blaze, loyal, wordless Blaze, never left, never trembled. He simply stayed. Until one day his heart stilled, right there on the threshold he once guarded. And then there was her, Eliza. The woman laughed like early spring sunshine. Some mornings, Caleb still brewed 2 cups of tea, placing one beside the empty chair beside him. Even knowing no hand would reach for it. Even knowing the warmth she carried had vanished from the world long ago. He didn't keep photos of her on the walls. No one ever saw a single frame. But in the old bedroom, under the bed, was a small wooden box. Inside it, her last birthday card, a faded photo of the 3 of them, Caleb, Eliza, and Blaze, standing in a golden park under falling leaves. And beneath the photograph, a handwritten note, smudged from years of touch. No matter what happens, we're still a team. Caleb no longer belonged to that team. Not really. But on certain nights, when the kennel roof glittered with frost, and when Luna curled up quietly against his chest the way Blaze once did, he could feel, in some quiet, sacred way, that someone was still there, watching, waiting, and perhaps, finally, forgiving. The Harper family's small pickup truck crawled quietly up the winding dirt road that led toward the tree-lined edge of Cedar Ridge, its tires crunching softly over gravel, while the pale gray sky stretched wide and low above them, casting a quiet, silver hush over everything it touched, as if the world itself was holding its breath. In the back seat, nestled between a worn suitcase and a cardboard box filled with books and small stuffed animals, a little girl sat curled in on herself like a shadow, still and silent, her gaze fixed unblinking on the mist-fogged window pane as the trees passed by like faded memories. Her name was Lily Harper, a name the town still spoke in recent weeks, though never loudly. No one really talked about what had happened on the Glass Hollow Bridge 6 weeks ago. At most, they whispered fragments of a tragedy too heavy to carry aloud. Driver lost control. There were only 3 people in the car. She's the only one who made it out. And that was always where the sentence stopped. The newspapers called it an unforeseeable tragedy, a heartbreaking accident no one saw coming. But for Lily, it wasn't a headline. It was a fracture. A break so deep and permanent it changed the way her body breathed, the way her soul sat inside her skin. She didn't remember much, just the sound of shattering glass, the screaming of twisted metal, the sharp sting of gasoline in the air. Then came the flashing red lights, the panicked voices, and a trembling hand that reached for hers one last time, before letting go forever. From that moment forward, Lily Harper didn't speak again. Her maternal grandparents, the Ellisons, took her in, bringing her back to the quiet wooden house at the edge of town, the one they'd lived in for more than 30 years after retiring. They had lost their only son and his wife in the blink of an eye, and now they held on to their granddaughter as if she were the last fragile thread tying them to a world that had once made sense. Lily didn't cry, she didn't shout or thrash or collapse, but in her storm-gray eyes there was something else, something that adults often described in hushed tones as too grown for her age. Not intelligence, emptiness, a silent kind of loss, slow-burning and invisible, like a layer of ash resting atop embers that still quietly burned beneath. She asked no questions upon arriving at the new house. She simply unpacked her school books, lined her stuffed animals on the shelf, and sat by the window for the rest of the afternoon, staring out through the glass at nothing and everything. No one knew that from the moment she arrived, she had already seen them. The creatures on the other side of the fence. And they had seen her too. Since the day of the accident, Lily Harper hadn't uttered a single sound. No crying, no calling out, not even a whispered grandma in her sleep. She existed like a wisp of smoke, so light, it seemed a strong enough breeze could carry her away without anyone noticing. The child psychologist Mrs. Ellison took her to see had spoken with a tone that balanced somewhere between sorrow and helplessness. "She's not physically incapable of speaking," she said quietly. "She's choosing not to." They called it selective mutism, a trauma-induced silence. But to Lily, there were no diagnoses, no labels. The world was simply too loud, and silence was the only place left where she could still breathe. She could hear perfectly, in fact. Too perfect. But every gentle invitation, every softly worded question dissolved into the empty space around her. She shook her head to say no, nodded faintly to say yes. Or sometimes, I said nothing at all. No one pushed, no one even knew where to begin. Mr. Ellison, a retired mechanic and veteran, would sit with her on the porch most afternoons, peeling apples and handing her slices one by one. She ate them without a word, nodded her thanks, then fell back into her quiet. Some evenings, Mrs. Ellison would open the old children's books she used to read to Lily's father, her voice steady as she read aloud to no one in particular. Lily wouldn't react. But every now and then, her small fingers would reach forward and gently turn the page. Inside that house, the volume of life had been turned down to a whisper. The television remained off. Doors were closed with reverent care. The doorbell had its batteries removed. It was as if the entire world had agreed to tiptoe, so they wouldn't startle the silence that lived inside her. One night, Mrs. Ellison woke to the sound of the faintest footsteps. She rose, quietly padded down the stairs, and found Lily standing alone in the dark, one hand resting on the cold window pane, her gaze locked on the woods beyond. Her eyes didn't blink, as if she was listening to something that only she could hear. The next morning, Lily sat drawing. Her lines were uneven, but the image was unmistakable. A large dog with pointed ears, standing watch over a small girl. No one understood. But no one asked. At first, Caleb thought it was a trick of the morning light, a bird flitting past the edge of the pine boughs, or perhaps just a patch of mist that hadn't yet burned off. But the second time, he saw it more clearly. A small figure, still as stone, standing between two trees near the edge of the fence line. The little girl didn't move closer, didn't wave, didn't speak. She simply stood there, clutching the hem of her coat, her eyes fixed on the German shepherds moving through their training drills with precision and focus. The dogs didn't bark, didn't charge forward. But they knew. Their ears perked, their heads turned, and then just as quickly they returned to their formation, accepting her presence as if it belonged to the rhythm of their mornings. Caleb didn't call out. He only glanced her way, then returned to his whistle. But when the drills ended and he turned again, she was gone, as if she had never been there at all. The next day, she came again, this time standing a little closer, just outside the low wooden gate that led into the yard. She said nothing, made no gesture, only her eyes spoke wide, still and deep as the sky before a storm. She kept coming, every morning, always at dawn, while the dew still clung to the grass like pearls, always silent, always disappearing just before Caleb could reach her. Until one day, he walked out earlier than usual, and there, at the base of the fence, was something small and deliberate. A single strawberry lollipop, still wrapped, still shining. Every morning, just as the mist still clung to the tips of the grass and the sunlight had only begun to slip gently through the gaps in the trees, Lily Harper would appear by the edge of the fence. She didn't come running with the carefree bounce of a child. Instead, she moved slowly, one small, hesitant step at a time. Each footfall, a quiet negotiation between herself and the fear she still carried like a shadow behind her ribs. At first, she stood far off, half hidden behind the tall ferns. Then, day by day, she came a little closer, pausing behind the moss-covered rock, then standing near the gravel path that curved toward the side gate. After a week, she found the courage to step onto the very path that led up to the training yard, the place where the dogs moved with focus and precision under Caleb's calm direction. No one asked her to come. No one set a chair aside waiting for her. But Lily came anyway, as if this ritual was something her heart had decided on without asking permission from her mind. Some days, the rain would start early, and her oversized coat would soak through at the shoulders, her hair sticking in wet strands to her forehead. But still, her eyes followed every movement in the yard, never straying from the rhythm of the dogs, how they responded to Caleb's gestures, how they held their formation like quiet warriors who didn't need words to understand each other. The dogs began to recognize her, too. They didn't bark, they didn't growl. They simply lifted their heads whenever her silhouette passed behind the veil of mist, then calmly returned to their training, as if they sensed something delicate and real had begun drawing near. Caleb didn't say a word. He noticed her, of course. But he didn't call out, didn't wave, didn't ask questions. He simply continued the way he always had. One short whistle meant stand, a long one meant lie down, a flick of his wrist meant form up. And yet, he didn't miss a thing. He caught every glance, every new step closer than the day before, every small shift in the girl's presence like the changing tide. One day, Lily brought a small notebook with her. She sat on a low log just beyond the fence, pencil in hand, quietly scribbling something while her eyes stayed fixed on Caleb's every move, especially the way he guided Titan and Luna through a new routine. She didn't know it, but on the other side of the yard, Caleb was also memorizing something not on paper, but in the quiet spaces of his chest, where old wounds had left room for new beginnings. Lily's world had no spoken language. But with every morning she returned, standing just a little closer than the last, she had begun to open something else entirely. A language made not of sound, but of quiet determination. Caleb wasn't used to children. He never sought their company. In the world he had built one shaped by loss, distance, and discipline, everything moved on its own track, closed and steady, untouched by change. And he'd made peace with that. But ever since Lily started showing up by the fence each morning, something had begun to shift. Not quickly, not loudly, but just enough for him to notice. He saw her at first through the corner of his eye, then later in the faint reflection on the kennel's window, and eventually, directly, there she was. Every time, he'd tilt his head slightly, just enough to let her know he'd seen her. But he never waved, never called her over, never asked her name. Not out of coldness, but out of a quiet kind of respect, as if he understood that any sudden move might send her retreating forever. Caleb had never been a man of many words, and with Lily, he felt instinctively that words wouldn't help, because he had once stood where she now stood, on the edge of something broken, choosing silence like armor. So instead of speaking, he chose to act. That morning, he adjusted the old gate leading to the kennels so it no longer cracked when opened, just in case someone wanted to slip in quietly without being noticed. He placed a small water bottle on the windowsill outside the training shed, even though no one in the house needed it. And one day, when he noticed Lily sitting on a slightly slanted rock, he left a smooth, sanded wooden plank right there shaped like a bench, nameless and waiting. Not a word was exchanged, but something had already begun. They were all signs. Not invitations, but not refusals either. They were quiet gestures that said, "I know you're here, and if you ever need it, there's a place for you here." The dogs followed their handler's lead. They didn't get excited. They didn't startle Lily. They continued with their training drills, focused and composed. But every so often, when Caleb wasn't looking, Titan would subtly turn his head, Athena's ears would lift slightly, and Luna would lie a little closer to the fence than usual. There was a particular kind of silence that existed between Lily and Caleb, not the kind rooted in avoidance, but in mutual respect, a silence that gave space rather than withheld it. Because sometimes, the gentlest thing you can offer someone isn't the question, "Are you okay?" It's the quiet acceptance of their presence without any demand for explanation. That morning, the fog was heavier than usual. The air hung thick and damp over the training yard, and each of Caleb's steps sank softly into the wet grass. He had just fastened Titan's training leash when he heard the soft crunch of gravel from beyond the wooden fence. He didn't turn. He didn't have to. He already knew who was there. Lily. She appeared the way she always did, without sound, without ceremony, just a small figure in the endless white haze. But today, something was different. She wasn't hiding behind her usual mossy rock. She wasn't tucked into the corner of the fence. She was walking forward. Caleb didn't change his breath. His hand remained on Titan's shoulder, not tightening, not withdrawing. He didn't call her. He didn't show surprise. Instead, he glanced quietly toward Luna, the only female in the pack, the one whose gentle instincts were unlike any other. Luna stood closest to the kennel. Her pale cream coat shimmered faintly in the gray light. Her ears were lifted, not in alert, but in something softer, like she was listening for something unspoken. Lily stopped just a few feet away, an arm's length at most. She didn't look at Caleb. Her eyes were fixed only on the dog now watching her in return. Two figures, one small, one strong, facing each other through the veil of fog like characters pulled from a forgotten fairy tale. Caleb didn't move. He didn't even blink too hard, because he knew this moment, if rushed, would vanish like soap bubbles in the wind. Lily looked down. Her tiny fists clenched the sleeves of her sweater until the fabric bunched in wrinkled folds. Then, slowly, achingly slow, she extended her arm. Her hand was trembling, pale as porcelain from the cold and from fear. It hovered just inches from Luna's fur. Luna didn't move. She stood like stone, only her eyes softening, like she was offering comfort in the only language she knew. And then it happened. With a motion so fragile it could stop the air, Lily placed her hand on Luna's back. The second her fingers made contact with that warm, thick fur, something broke. Not in a bad way. In this way, a dam finally gives way after holding too much for too long. Lily started crying. No sound. No sobbing. Just a sudden, full body shaking as her tiny shoulders heaved with quiet grief. Tears spilled down her cheeks like a storm that had been waiting for permission. She folded over, forehead resting near Luna's shoulder, gripping the dog's back like someone who had just reached land after nearly drowning. Caleb didn't step forward. He stayed still, watching this girl tremble in the embrace of a creature who didn't speak, but somehow understood everything. And he knew. Even without anyone saying a word, this was the first time Lily had allowed herself to fall apart since the accident. Luna gently turned her head. She didn't lick. She didn't nudge. She just rested her cheek softly against Lily's shoulder, like a quiet vow whispered into skin. I'm here. You're not alone. Behind the fence, the other dogs stood scattered across the yard. Not one of them made a sound. Even Titan, the one who usually growled at strangers, lay down, resting his chin on his front paws, his gaze turned toward the place where Lily clung to Luna. It was as if the entire pack had silently bowed their heads in witness to a sacred moment. In that soft light, with fog clinging to lashes and only the rhythm of breath between them, no one needed to speak. But both Caleb and Lily understood. She had just found the first thing that hadn't left her behind. A few minutes later, once the shaking had settled into stillness, Lily slowly stood up. Her eyes were red, her nose flushed from the cold, and she turned to look at Caleb. She didn't speak. She just gave a small nod, gentle, almost imperceptible, but full of meaning. A thank you that didn't need sound. Caleb nodded back, mirroring her motion exactly. No words, but everything had changed. From that moment on, the boundary between their two worlds no longer existed. There was no more the man and the girl behind the fence, no more my dogs and the silent visitor. There was only one truth left behind in the clearing fog, that sometimes the smallest touch offered at the right time, without asking for anything in return, is enough to thaw even the deepest winter inside a guarded heart. After that morning, the morning Lily placed her hand on Luna's back, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic, not the kind of sweeping change people expect from a turning point. It was subtle, so small you might miss it if you weren't paying close attention, like the softest movement of a clock's hand ticking forward in silence. Lily still didn't speak. But from that day on, she didn't just watch anymore. She started staying longer. Each morning she came with a little hard-bound notebook, a sky-blue cover, edges worn and curling slightly from the damp air. Caleb noticed it one morning while working with the smaller group in the training yard. Every time he raised his hand in signal, blew his whistle, or changed the team formation, she would glance down and quietly jot something in pencil. Her pencil never scratched loudly, never stabbed at the page. Every motion was light, deliberate, careful-like. Each mark she made carried weight, like it meant something sacred. She didn't always sit in the same spot. Some days it was the mossy rock near the gate. Other times it was the old wooden step. Sometimes she sat so close that Caleb could have reached out and touched her shoulder with one arm. But he never did. He kept his distance, not because he feared scaring her off, but because he understood. This space between them wasn't a barrier. It was the very path she was using to come closer. Every gesture he made, a hand raised horizontally, fingers grouped together, a palm turned downward, was faithfully recorded in her notebook. Then she started making her own symbols. A small circle for the dog, an arrow for direction, a slash to indicate speed. The way she interpreted the movement patterns caught Caleb off guard. He'd written beginner manuals for canine training before, but this felt different, smarter, more intuitive. And she didn't just write. She was learning. One day, Caleb gave Titan the command to step back 3 paces and pivot a maneuver used for risk control situations. When he glanced toward the fence, he caught Lily making the same motion with her hand. Tiny, subtle, almost invisible, but perfectly in sync, as if she were mimicking each step inside her mind like a dance choreographed in silence. He'd even seen her smile once, not a full smile, but a faint curve at the corner of her mouth when Athena cleared the obstacle course with a flawless leap. It wasn't a smile for anyone to see. It was the kind of smile that escapes when something quietly amazes you. Every morning, while Caleb cleaned the yard, he noticed new lines drawn in the dirt chalky paths, marking formation points, circles sketched to represent the kennels. Lily was turning the ground outside the fence into her own kind of classroom. She hadn't stepped into a real classroom in nearly a year, but here, among fog and fur and creatures that didn't ask, didn't laugh, didn't judge, she was learning to reconnect with the world again, and she was starting with the things that didn't need words. One late autumn morning, before the sun had fully climbed past the treetops, Caleb stepped outside earlier than usual. The night before, the dogs had barked quietly just before dawn, not in alarm, but in the way animals sometimes whisper to one another when something changes in the air. He wasn't worried, but something told him to check things out a little sooner than normal. As he passed Kennel 3, where Luna and Titan usually slept, Caleb froze. There, pressed into the damp gravel beneath a thin mist, were tiny footprints. Too small to be his, too close to the kennels to belong to someone just passing by. The prints started at the edge of the narrow path near the fence, curved across the training yard's border, and stopped right beside the wooden gate of the kennel on the right. No smudges, no dragging. Whoever had left them had stepped with intention, with care, like they didn't want to disturb a single thing. Caleb knelt down, pressing 2 fingers into the ground beside the tracks. Small shoes, worn soles, a little mud clinging to the edges. A child. And he only knew one child who came here. Lily. Right beneath the kennel door, the thing that made Caleb pause was a lollipop. The wrapper was pale red, with little strawberries and the word "sweetberry" printed on the side. Unopened. Perfectly intact. It lay on its side, as if it had been dropped, or placed there on purpose. Caleb bent down, picked it up, and quietly slipped it into the pocket of his coat. The dogs didn't stir. Luna was still lying in her usual spot, eyes half-lidded with calm. But as Caleb stepped closer, she gave her tail a single soft wag before settling again. Titan was beside her, chin resting on his front paws, eyes locked on the doorway like he'd been expecting Caleb to arrive. Caleb didn't ask questions. He didn't go looking for someone to blame. He just walked back to the house, sat down at the table, poured himself a cup of coffee, and opened the weathered logbook he kept on the edge of the counter. Under the unusual activity column, he wrote just 3 short lines. Small footprints near the kennel. Lollipop, strawberry. No disturbance, no signs of stress. Then he closed the book. No comments, no calls to the Ellisons, no warning signs posted. because Caleb understood something that can't be taught. Some things, when left alone, grow exactly the way they're meant to. And some people like Lily can only move forward when no one's rushing them to get there. That afternoon, just before he locked the kennel for the night, Caleb laid a thin towel over the wooden step outside. He didn't say why, didn't leave a note. But for the first time in years, he left the kennel door slightly ajar, a narrow crack, just enough to let the light spill through. And he knew. If something was different in the morning, he wouldn't be surprised. While the town of Cedar Ridge slept beneath a thick blanket of fog, and the clock ticked quietly past midnight, Lily Harper slipped softly out of bed. She pulled on her old canvas shoes, shrugged into a gray sweater that still hung past her knees, and gently cracked open the back door. The Ellisons' wooden house had no alarm. Lily had learned how to oil the hinges. Even the rhythm of her footsteps on the creaky porch had become practiced light, deliberate, like she was moving through the night itself so as not to wake it. The distance from her house to the dog fence was close to 100 meters through trees, but for Lily, it felt like a journey upstream against her own fears. With every step, her breathing steadied. And the closer she got to that low wooden gate, the more her heart began to race. Not with fear of being caught, but with a strange, quiet excitement. Like a child approaching something just on the edge of magic. She brought nothing with her except her notebook and a small flashlight wrapped in cloth to dim the beam. When she arrived, she didn't call out. She simply tapped 3 times on the wooden gatepost, a signal she'd made up on her own. It wasn't long before 2 golden eyes glowed softly in the dark. Then a heavy shadow moved toward her without a sound. Titan. Lily held out her hand, palm up, not too high. Titan stopped. She pressed a finger to her lips, a sign for quiet. Titan lay down slowly, his tail giving a single soft thump. From that night on, each dog came to her in turn. Not in the order Caleb had trained them, but by some rhythm only Lily seemed to understand. Every night became a quiet lesson of its own. Athena learned to spin on command with a simple circle drawn by Lily's hand. Luna knew to lie down whenever Lily tilted her head. Zeus, usually the most excitable, calmed beneath her steady hand after 3 deep breaths. Lily didn't use whistles. She didn't shout commands. She trained with her eyes, with her hands, with the calm energy she carried in her silence. And the strangest thing was, the dogs understood. They didn't need time to warm up to her. They didn't hesitate. It was as if the day belonged to Caleb, and the night belonged to Lily. She experimented with the same signals Caleb had shown them, then modified them with instinct. Every observation, every adjustment went into the notebook. Apollo prefers forehead touches. Luna responds well to repeated motion. Titan needs eye contact before a cue. Page after page, the notebook grew thicker. Not a diary, not a child's sketchbook, but a field manual written in patience and quiet care. One night, a strong wind blew through, tossing Lily's hair wildly across her face. She was in the middle of signaling Juno to lie down, but her view was suddenly blocked. Juno paused, waited until the wind passed. Lily pushed her hair aside, raised her hand again, and Juno dropped instantly into a perfect rest position. She smiled. Not wide, but real. And for the first time in months, she reached out and gave Juno a gentle pat on the shoulder. The dogs never asked about her pain, and she never spoke of theirs. But between them was something rare, something quiet and powerful, a kind of understanding that needed no words at all. The news came on a quiet weekend afternoon, while Caleb was trimming the grass around the South Kennels. Janet Hargrove, the manager of the local animal rescue station, pulled up in her dusty silver pickup and parked right at the front gate. Her face gave everything away before she even opened her mouth. "Caleb," she began gently as she stepped out of the truck, "they've voted." There was no need to ask who they were. In Cedar Ridge, they always meant the town council, the ones who didn't live near the forest, who had never heard a dog cry out in the middle of the night, who didn't know what it meant to feel a heavy headrest against your knee when grief made it hard to breathe. But they had power. That was all that mattered. She handed him a printed document with a bold headline: Proposal number 0947, Limitation on Large Breed Ownership in Residential Areas. The wording was clear: no room for loopholes. Effective December 1st, all households within Cedar Ridge jurisdiction shall be limited to no more than 303 pets of large dog breeds. Any household exceeding this limit must relocate, rehome, or transfer the excess animals to an authorized care facility. Compliance required within 90 days of notice. Caleb read it through, folded it neatly. He didn't tear it, didn't throw it away, just slid it into the pocket of his jacket. Across the yard, the dogs were resting after their afternoon drills. Titan lay in the sun-drenched grass, his head nestled on his paws, half dozing. Luna spun in a slow circle before curling up beside the kennel door. None of them knew that in just 3 months, they might be separated for good. Caleb wasn't the kind of man who liked to argue, but this time he showed up at the town hall meeting, a place he hadn't stepped into for nearly 10 years. That evening, the small meeting room at City Hall was packed. The air was thick with the smell of old paper, sweat, and stale coffee. People came out of curiosity, out of concern, or just to keep the community safe. Some had never even seen Caleb's property, but they were ready to raise their hands all the same. When his turn came, Caleb stood up. No papers in hand, no printed laws to quote. Just a man, with calloused hands and a weathered voice shaped by too many winters. "They're not pets," he said, his eyes scanning the room. "They're lives I saved, and lives that saved me." There was a pause, a hush that felt like it could tip either way. Then Rachel Simmons, who was afraid of anything with fur, stood up and fired back. "This isn't about feelings, Mr. Walker. It's about rules and safety. 14 large dogs living right by town. If something happens one day, who takes responsibility?" A few nods, some eyes looking away. Caleb said nothing more. He knew what they saw, an old man on the edge of the world, clinging to a pack of ghosts. When the vote began, Caleb didn't stay to hear it. He left quietly, shoulders squared, but his gaze dimmed like the land after too many floods. Lily didn't go to the meeting, but she heard everything. That night, as Mr. and Mrs. Ellison returned from town, their voices carried through the living room door. Not loud, but just enough to slip through the crack Lily had left open. She sat curled up on the edge of her bed, notebook open on her lap, a pencil resting between her fingers. "There's nothing Caleb can do," Mr. Harper said, his voice heavy. "They voted. 14 dogs, and the law says 3. "Oh, Lord," Mrs. Ellison sighed. "I can't imagine them being split up. If Lily finds out, it'll break her heart." Lily didn't cry, but her eyes didn't leave the pages of her notebook. In her mind, she saw it, all the dogs torn apart. Athena led away from Titan, Luna loaded onto a truck, each confused glance from those eyes she had come to know like family. The images played again and again, like a film with no pause button. That night, Lily didn't sleep. She sat by the window, notebook wide open, a small flashlight glowing faint beside her. She started flipping through every page she had written, marking down signals, categorizing each dog's behavior, redrawing the layout of the training yard. Then, she pulled out a fresh notebook, a newer one, and began from the first page. In slanted, careful handwriting across the top, she wrote, "Plan. Evidence." No one knew what she was doing. No one asked. But even in silence, an 8-year-old girl, one who had already lost everything, had just begun preparing for the very first fight of her life. It started with a few light coughs in the morning. Caleb thought it was just a seasonal cold. Fall had come early that year, and the air up on the ridge was always a bit colder than in town. He wasn't one to complain, not to others, and not even to himself. But the coughs grew deeper. They lingered longer. And more often than not, they came with a pressure in his chest, like an invisible hand tightening slowly around his ribs. One day, while checking the latch on a kennel door, he had to squat halfway through. One hand braced against his knee, his heartbeat pounding out of rhythm like a drum gone wrong. Titan came over, letting out a low, quiet growl. Not of warning, but of concern, like he was asking, "Are you all right?" Caleb simply stroked his ear and gave a small shake of his head, as if trying to convince himself more than the dog. Janet Hargrove was the first to notice something wasn't right. She came by to drop off a few bags of dog food and saw Caleb leaning against the side of the kennel, his breathing heavy, forehead beaded with sweat, even though the air was only just turning cool. "Caleb," she said sharply, her tone firm, "you need to see a doctor." He smiled, that familiar, stubborn smile that had fooled people into thinking he was tougher than he felt. But this time, it looked tired. "I'm still breathing," he said. "It's not about breathing," Janet replied. "It's about living." 3 days later, he went to the town clinic, a little white house with a faded sign hanging above the porch. Dr. Ramirez was there, the same woman who had stitched up a bite on his forearm 2 years back, when Athena had thrashed in panic during an injury. But this time, there were no stitches. There was an echocardiogram, an EKG, a blood test. A week later, the results came back in a pale yellow envelope. Dr. Ramirez called him into her office, her fingers gently turning a pen between them. "Caleb," she began, her eyes not lifting from the paper. "You have severe aortic valve stenosis." He didn't ask what it meant. He didn't ask, "How long?" Those weren't questions for a man who had once pulled bodies from burning homes and buried his wife in silence. "Can it be operated on?" he asked simply. "Not in your condition. You're too weak. No surgeon will take the risk." Caleb nodded. He walked out of the clinic, slid the envelope into the pocket of his coat right next to the folded ordinance on animal limits. Now he understood. Some things didn't have to be taken away. Sometimes your own body quietly starts taking time back, little by little. That afternoon, the sky turned a heavy shade of gray, like charcoal smeared across the hills of Cedar Ridge. A sudden forest rain swept in, coating the yard in damp soil and the scent of decaying leaves. But despite the cold, Lily came. She stood beneath the edge of the pine trees near the training field, her usual place. Her face was tucked beneath the hood of her coat, arms wrapped tightly around the small notebook pressed to her chest, like she was trying to hold together something that was slowly breaking. Caleb was wiping down a training leash, hands trembling slightly, though he tried to keep them steady. The dogs had already been fed. The kennels were clean. But he lingered outside, as if avoiding the inside of that house, now so quiet it made the walls feel cold. Then the cough came. At first, a single dry sound, then 2, 3 sharper ones. Caleb hunched over, one hand gripping the wooden beam of the kennel as his chest tightened, like someone was twisting it from the inside out. Lily flinched. She took a step forward, then stopped, unsure if she should be seen. Her eyes followed every movement, his shaking hand, the slight lean in his posture, like balance had become something borrowed. and then he coughed again. This time, so hard he dropped to his knees, and a dark red fleck flew from his lips. He wiped it quickly with the back of his hand, trying to hide it. But it was too late. Lily had seen it. She stood frozen, her heart pounded hard in her small chest. No one had ever explained illness to her. No one had ever told her that Caleb could disappear. But she knew what she had seen. Blood on someone's hand was a bad sign. It looked too much like that day, the last time she saw her mother in the twisted wreck of a car, when the adults had told her, "You don't need to remember this, sweetheart." Lily stepped back without a sound. Then she ran, straight through the trees, back toward her grandparents' house. She didn't turn on the light. She didn't cry. But that night, she didn't sleep. She sat on the floor of her room, notebook open in front of her, pencil trembling slightly between her fingers. In her mind, she saw it play out. Caleb collapsing. No one there. No one knew what he needed. No one arrived in time. The dogs standing silent, not understanding, everything falling quiet again. She couldn't let that happen. Not again. Not ever. The next morning, Mr. and Mrs. Ellison were surprised to see Lily up earlier than usual. She ate fast, get dressed faster, and left the house with a small crossbody satchel she'd never used before. Inside were her notebook, 2 dog biscuits, and a handkerchief embroidered with the letter E. She said nothing, but in her eyes, clear, cold, and focused, there was something new. The look of someone who had made up their mind about something big. From that moment on, Lily wasn't just a quiet observer anymore. She became a watcher, a planner, the one who took notes, tracked patterns, and knew what others didn't. She became the only person who understood the truth. Caleb didn't have much time. Ever since she saw the blood on Caleb's hand, Lily stopped standing back and waiting. She started waking even earlier before her midnight visits, before the sun thought about rising. Not just to sit quietly by the fence, but to do something. She brought with her a new notebook, soft brown leather, a gift from Mrs. Ellison last year for her birthday. She had never dared write in it, until now. On the first page, she drew a full diagram of the kennel layout, the training yard, and the main house entrance. Every detail was there: emergency exits, hose locations, the bench where Caleb usually kept his first aid kit. On the second page, she made a list. Every dog: Titan, strong, quick to react; Luna, sensitive, always observing; Apollo, agile, easily excitable. Next to each name, she wrote how they might help in an emergency. Some lines were hurried, others circled in red. Hold position, go alert, stay by victim. She wasn't trained in medicine, but she had watched. She had learned. She remembered how Caleb once performed chest compressions on a puppy that had stopped breathing after falling in the pond. She remembered how he said, "Stay," to Titan, then pointed to Luna to run and fetch the kit. Tiny pieces of memory pieced themselves together into something solid, a plan, clear in her mind. That first night, she tested a signal with Titan. She touched the center of her forehead, then pointed toward the main house window. Titan tilted his head, unsure. She repeated it, slower, clearer. On the third try, Titan turned and trotted in the exact direction she pointed. She wrote it down, underlined it twice. Needs 3 repetitions. Will improve. Luna was easier. One gesture finger to lips, then pointing down, and Luna lay flat, eyes locked on her. Lily gave her a soft pat on the back. Not praise exactly, but acknowledgement. Each night became a new drill. Sometimes she played the role of the fallen, lying still in the middle of the yard, arm raised weakly. Other nights, she dipped her handkerchief in red ink to simulate blood. She trained the dogs to recognize the situation. Once, she even faked a coughing fit and taught Luna to sprint toward the house at that sound. Lily didn't need anyone to see. She didn't need applause or approval. But in her mind, the goal was sharp as glass. If Caleb went down, she had to be the one to make sure the pack knew what to do. One afternoon, Janet stopped by with supplies and spotted a crumpled page left behind in one of the kennels. She picked it up and squinted at the strange markings: arrows, X, circles, and dog names. At the bottom, in a shaky, penciled line, it read, "Emergency response if he falls." Janet said nothing. She folded the page, tucked it gently into her coat pocket, and she began visiting more often. She didn't ask questions, but she paid closer attention, because deep down she knew something big was being built, by someone smaller than anyone had ever expected. In a world where adults held meetings and handed out orders, an 8-year-old girl was quietly preparing to save the life of a man no one else even realized was running out of time. And her team? Not people, but 14 beings once labeled dangerous, now becoming the most quietly powerful response unit Cedar Ridge had ever seen. Winter arrived in Cedar Ridge without warning, like a door slamming shut before anyone had time to gather their things. Overnight, the sky turned from dull gray to bone white. The tall pines along the ridge bent beneath the weight of wet snow, and the wind howled down the valley in long, mournful cries that sounded almost human. The weather report crackled from the old radio in the Ellisons' kitchen. Level 3 blizzard approaching, high winds and hail, widespread power outages expected. Caleb heard it. He didn't say a word, just stood by the window, watching as layers of frost crawled across the edges of the training yard. His vision wasn't what it used to be, but even he could tell this winter was different. Lily heard it too, but instead of panic, something else settled in her chest. Calm, almost like the storm wasn't a threat, but a sign that something was about to begin. That afternoon, the snow started falling quietly, slowly, each flake like a paper-thin petal floating from the sky. The wind hadn't risen yet, but the air already tasted like metal, sharp and still, like the whole forest was bracing for something bigger. Lily sat upstairs, notebook clutched tightly to her chest, staring out the window. She didn't know why she felt it. She just knew. Something was coming. Her chest felt heavy, like it was filled with stone. And then it happened. Near dusk, while Caleb was stacking hay in the kennels and Lily was tying her scarf to head outside, there came a knock. Not on Caleb's door, on the back of the Ellisons' cabin. 3 knocks. Not loud, but fast. Urgent. Then silence. Mr. Ellison opened the door and found no one, only a mess of footprints, mud-stained and hurried, running in from the forest's edge and continuing on behind the house. In the thin layer of snow, there was a faint drag mark, like something heavy had been pulled. Lily slid down the stairs, breath tight. She didn't ask anything. She didn't have to. Someone was out there. Someone needed help. She dashed into her room, threw on her heavy sweater, stuffed a flashlight and a rope into her canvas satchel, and slipped out the back, racing past the trees toward the rocky hill, the one place the snow hadn't fully claimed yet. Caleb was just fastening Titan's lead when he heard it. A whistle, sharp, soft, but clear enough to turn his head. He saw her. Lily. Not panicking, not crying, just standing there, signaling with her hands. Someone. In trouble. No questions. Caleb tossed the flashlight to her. She caught it. He nodded once. Titan stood first. Luna followed. And just like that, on the first snowy evening of that harsh winter, an 8-year-old girl and a group of dogs, once labeled dangerous, stepped into their very first rescue. The wind picked up as Lily climbed the rocky slope, following the faint drag trail left in the snow. Her flashlight bounced dimly with each step, casting shaky beams across the white. The snow fell heavier, now colder, sharper, like tiny shards of glass slicing at her cheeks. The dogs moved in formation, Titan in the lead, flanked by Athena and Apollo. Luna ran alongside Lily, eyes scanning, and Zeus, large, steady stayed at the rear, a silent guardian. No one spoke. There was only the crunch of snow, the rhythm of breath, the steady forward push of a team that had trained for this in silence. Then they saw him. A man, maybe 30, collapsed beneath a slanted boulder, his hiking gear torn and frost-covered. One arm was buried in the snow, clawing weakly. His breath came in shallow wisps, barely visible in the cold. Beside him, a shredded backpack, a tangled mess of rope, and a map crumpled beyond recognition. Lily stopped 5 steps away. She didn't rush, didn't panic. She raised her hand. Titan froze. Luna moved forward slowly, sniffed the man, then turned back to Lily, and gave a single quiet nod. No threat. Still alive. Lily nodded and pulled out the rope. She let out a soft whistle, barely audible, and Athena stepped in close beside the man, lying down across from him like a living heater. Apollo moved around to the back, blocking the wind with his solid frame. Lily knelt, gently placing a cloth over the man's face, then pulled both sides of his coat tighter around his chest. Her movements weren't clumsy, they weren't rushed. They looked like they'd been rehearsed, again and again, somewhere deep in her mind. The sky turned a heavy, solid gray. The snow started falling harder, thick like a curtain of wool. But in the middle of that storm, Lily and the dogs stood their ground, forming a circle of life around a man who was fading fast. The wind screamed between the rocks like voices from something ancient and lost. Snow fell sideways, slicing across their faces like cold, stinging lashes. At that moment, most of the grown-ups in town had locked their doors, shut their curtains, and gathered around fireplaces, waiting for the storm to pass. But out on the ridge, an 8-year-old girl was leading a rescue mission, not with phones, not with shouts, but with her hands, her eyes, and a trust that ran deeper than words. Lily stood over the injured man, squinting through the darkness. The flashlight was fading, barely lighting half a meter ahead. But she didn't flinch. She didn't panic. She looked like a commander checking her options in a battlefield drawn in ice and wind. First, she turned to Titan, made a 2-finger motion, backtrack and scan. Titan immediately backed up 3 steps, lifted his head, and sniffed the air, his eyes sweeping like a living radar. Next were Apollo and Juno, the quickest of the group. Lily pointed toward the direction of the kennels, then traced a slow circle in the air with her finger. The message was clear. Go. Get help. Wake them up. Apollo let out a small cry. Then he and Juno bolted 2 streaks, slicing through the snowstorm. They vanished in seconds. But Lily knew the pack was now in motion, just like she had trained them to be during all those quiet nights. The man was still unconscious, but his breathing had steadied. Lily unwrapped her scarf and laid it gently across his chest. From her pocket, she pulled out a cloth-wrapped biscuit, the kind she kept ready for surprise drills. She fed him tiny crumbles, one at a time, careful and patient. With her other hand, she stroked Luna's back and gave a signal. Stay close. Keep him warm. Luna laid down tight against him, pressing her warm body into his coat, her breath fogging softly around his neck. This was her assigned job maintaining body heat. Athena, with her sharp instincts, positioned herself against the direction of the wind. Every time it howled, she leaned into it, blocking the gusts so they wouldn't bury the man in snow. No one had taught her that. She just knew. Zeus, the oldest and strongest, stayed close to Lily like a personal guard. If something unexpected happened, if anyone got too close, his job was simple: alert. But for now he sat silent, eyes locked on every movement Lily made, as if protecting the sky itself. Lily pulled out her little notebook not to write, but to double-check. She flipped to the page she'd drawn up weeks ago. Emergency Response Plan. She reviewed each line and crossed out the ones already completed. Position dogs. Send for help. Maintain body temperature. Monitor consciousness. Prepare for transport. Only one step left. Bring him home. But the man couldn't walk. And she, no matter how determined, was still just a little girl. Her legs weren't strong enough to drag a full-grown man through snow and wind. Lily looked at Zeus, then Athena, then Titan. An idea took shape in her head. Bold, risky, but not impossible. She pulled the rope from her bag and tore her handkerchief in half, then started working fast. Her fingers tied the rope across the man's chest, looping it over his shoulders and down around his waist. Then she fastened it tightly to the harness strapped over Zeus's back, the only one strong enough to pull. Zeus growled quietly, not a protest, but a sound of readiness. He was waiting for the signal. Lily gave it. Titan and Athena moved to the sides for balance. Luna stayed pressed against the man's body to keep the warmth. Once everyone was in place, Lily raised her hand final signal. Go. Zeus leaned forward, steady and slow. Each step sunk deep into the snow. The man's body glided gently along, stabilized by the rope and supported by Luna at his side. Athena walked on the left to keep the body upright. Titan watched the path ahead, and Lily led the way, flashlight flickering, casting thin beams through a world made white and wild. The way back wasn't easy. The wind grew fiercer with every turn. At times, the snow reached Lily's knees, but she never turned around. She didn't cry, she didn't scream for help, because she knew one thing. She wasn't alone. An 8-year-old girl, silent for nearly a year, was now leading a rescue team powered not by orders, but by trust and persistence. Every step she took, every wave of her hand, every glance to the side spoke louder than anything she'd ever said aloud. This wasn't just a rescue, it was her voice, and she was finally being heard. And just like that, they made their way through the storm. By the time morning came, the blizzard had finally calmed, but Cedar Ridge still bore the scars of a long, chaotic night. Snow lay thick across rooftops, power lines sagged under the weight of ice, and the wind still whispered low through the valley as if to remind everyone that peace is always temporary. No one in town could have imagined that, in the heart of the storm, something extraordinary had just happened. Around 6 a.m, Janet Hargrove, on her way to check on the animal shelter, was the first to see them. She was driving slowly along a snow-covered road when her headlights caught a line of shadows up ahead. She hit the brakes, her heart stopping. It was Lily. The girl was at the front, cheeks flushed red from the wind, hair wild, both hands gripping a rope slung across her shoulder. Behind her was a sight so surreal, it took Janet's breath away. 14 German shepherds marched in formation, surrounding an unconscious man who was being pulled by a rope harness tied to Zeus's back. Luna walked close beside him, steadying his upper body. Athena and Titan flanked both sides. Not a single bark, not a sound. The scene, against the soft white fog of snow, looked like an ancient procession led by a child who had never once asked to lead. Janet rushed out of the car and ran toward them. "Lily!" she called, her voice caught between disbelief and awe. "What in the world?" Lily didn't answer. She simply pointed to the man on the ground. Her face was smudged, lips cracked, but her eyes were glowing with something fierce. "He was stuck on the ridge," she said, breathing short. We found him." Janet knelt down. The man was alive, barely. His pulse was faint, but there. And she recognized him instantly. It was Carter Moore, the local journalist who had left town to write about the mountain trails. He'd been missing for 3 days, and the authorities had already begun preparing the worst. Not likely to survive in these conditions. And yet, a little girl silent for months, and a pack of dogs once deemed too dangerous, had found him. In silence. By mid-morning, the story had reached every corner of the town. When the ambulance finally arrived, Lily stood off to the side, not wanting attention, not needing praise. But when the paramedics asked who had kept the man warm, who had administered basic aid, who tied the pulleys, who sent for help, all answers pointed back to one name: Lily Harper. And when they asked who had trained the dogs to act like a coordinated rescue unit, Janet simply looked over to the girl gently stroking Athena's ear. No one had trained them. She did it herself. That night, as Caleb sat by the window with a mug of hot tea, Janet brought him a copy of the next morning's newspaper. The front-page photo was taken from a distance. White snow, a living rescue convoy marching toward the lens, led by a small girl with her hair blown back in the wind and eyes full of courage that hadn't yet learned fear. The headline read, "The Girl and Her Guardians, a Miracle in the Storm." Caleb stared at the photo for a long time. His hands trembled slightly, but his lips curved into a soft smile, the kind that belongs to someone who has finally fulfilled a promise. The dream he hadn't been able to finish now had someone new to carry it forward. A few days later, after the ice began to thaw, the town council held an emergency meeting. But this time, it wasn't to talk about limiting household pets. It was to recognize something that had never happened in the history of Cedar Ridge. A new proposal was submitted, not by a board member, but by Janet along with footage from a small camera attached to Athena's collar. Proposal: withdraw the animal limit ordinance for the home of Mr. Caleb Walker. Recommend that his dog pack be officially recognized as a special response unit under Cedar Ridge Emergency Services. No one objected. Evan Rachel Simmons, the loudest opponent before, stood quietly, pulled a box of dog biscuits from her bag, placed it on the council table, and said softly, "If they get to stay, I'd like to help feed them." From then on, they were known around town as Lily's Guardians. And that old wooden cabin at the edge of town, where a quiet old man and a quiet little girl had somehow healed each other, became a symbol of hope. The girl who hadn't spoken for nearly a year was now the one inspiring the entire community. And the dogs who had once been discarded were now symbols of love, loyalty, and the quiet miracles that can still happen, if we're patient enough to listen to silence. That morning, the sky over Cedar Ridge was heavy and gray. The clouds hung so low, it felt like the air itself was bracing for judgment. Caleb was up earlier than usual. Even though the ache in his chest still pulsed like a quiet knock against his ribs, he moved slowly but steadily, sweeping the floor of the main kennel, laying down fresh straw and checking every latch, every lock, every gate. Everything had to be clean. Everything had to be ready. Because today, the town council was coming. At exactly 9:03 a.m., a white pickup truck with the committee's seal rolled into the yard. The door opened, and 3 people stepped out. Mayor Avery, a stern man with a worn leather notebook always tucked under his arm. Rachel Simmons, the council member who had fought hardest against him. And Dana Fuller, a field inspector from the Department of Animal Welfare. They weren't alone. A cameraman and a clerk with a clipboard followed close behind. Caleb greeted them with a small nod. No smile. No pleasantries. The clothes he wore weren't fancy, just a faded gray shirt and an old pair of boots worn down at the heels. But everything was neat and pressed, the way a soldier might dress for his final march. "Are we on time?" Mayor Avery asked, his voice flat. "Just about," Caleb replied. Dana made her way around the fence line, scanning every detail: the height of the kennels, the firmness of the locks, the placement of food bowls, the vaccination records. All carefully documented in the thick folder Caleb had prepared 3 weeks ago. "Looks well maintained," she said, half to herself. Rachel didn't follow right away. She stood at the edge of the training yard, eyes flicking over the dogs lying quietly around the kennels, alert but calm. A few of them lifted their heads to look at her, but none barked, none growled. There was no chaos here, no aggression, just order, the kind of order that comes from trust, not fear. "Where are the rest of them?" Rachel asked sharply, narrowing her gaze at Caleb. 14 dogs. I only see 5. Caleb gestured towards the far end of the yard, where the grass had been cleared into a flat space bordered with small stones. It looked like a training field. "They're waiting," he said. Rachel frowned. "They?" "My kids," Caleb replied, eyes still fixed on the field. "And the one leading them." Just then, from behind the kennels, 3 sharp whistles rang out short, clean and decisive. Every dog snapped to attention like someone had flipped a switch. No confusion, no repeated orders. Each one moved into motion, heading toward the open field in a single line. Their steps were steady and measured. Someone unfamiliar might think it was luck, but anyone who'd been watching long enough would know better. This was discipline. Dana blinked. "Who gave that signal?" Caleb didn't answer. He just turned his head. And out from the shadows behind the kennels, a small figure stepped into the light. She wore a long brown coat and clutched a worn leather notebook in one hand. Her eyes were steady. No fear, no hesitation. That little girl was Lily Harper, the same one the whole town had once quietly assumed might never speak again. And today, she was in command. It felt like the entire council held their breath as Lily walked toward the center of the training field. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. She stopped exactly at the center on ground that Caleb had carefully leveled and chalked with faint lines. Her eyes swept the formation before her. 14 German shepherds, each standing at attention, each watching her alone. She took a deep breath, then stepped forward once. Her hand lifted, just a simple gesture. Fingers splayed, then closed into a fist. Immediately, the entire formation split down the center. 7 dogs stepped left, 7 stepped right. 2 straight lines, mirror images, no barking, no rushing. The movement was so smooth, so practiced, it felt like watching a perfectly rehearsed ballet. Only this was no stage, and the girl standing at its center had taught them this in silence. It was more than impressive. It was something sacred. "Let me know when you're ready for the next part. We're just getting to the heart of this turning point." Rachel Simmons let out a breath and instinctively stepped back half a pace. Dana Fuller reached for her notepad, scribbling something down, though even she wasn't sure there were any words that could properly describe what she'd just witnessed. Lily raised her hand again. This time, she pointed both index fingers toward the sky, then traced a slow circle in the air. The formation shifted. One by one, the dogs rotated from the front of the line, moving with smooth precision into a curved arc that circled Lily at the center. Then, with a folding motion from her arms, each dog sat perfectly spaced, tails neatly beside their front paws, ears tilted outward, eyes locked on the small girl standing in the middle of the circle. Another motion, a clasp of her hands, and the circle burst open like the unfolding petals of a flower. 4 dogs surged outward in 4 directions. The rest broke into 3 smaller squads, each one taking up a specific tactical pattern, a unit for holding positions. A mobile response team. A team assigned to protect the victim. Lily turned in place, then pressed one finger gently to her lips, a signal for silence. The entire pack dropped into a lying position, heads lowered. What they were doing now wasn't training anymore. It was harmony. It was understanding. It was a connection. A breeze rustled through the pine trees in the distance. Snow had begun to fall, delicate and steady. And there, in the middle of the field, a girl who had never stepped foot in any academy conducted 14 living souls as if they were a silent orchestra, and she, the quiet maestro. Lily bowed her head. Instantly, the dogs moved toward her, lining up in 2 even rows facing the town council. One dog titan stepped forward and sat down. He opened his mouth. Inside was a small cloth pouch, hand-stitched by Lily herself. Dana recognized it immediately. She knelt down and gently opened it. Inside were a pair of medical gloves, a sterile gauze pad, a rescue breathing tube, and a small folded note that read, "First response, follow commands." Dana's hands trembled as she read. Rachel stood frozen. Neither could speak. Caleb stood leaning against the fence, his eyes glassy with emotion. He hadn't known Lily would do this. But as he watched her standing tall among the dogs, calm and commanding, he realized this wasn't just a demonstration. This was an answer, a statement that didn't need to be spoken aloud. We're not dangerous. We are understood. We are trusted. And we were trained with love. And the entire town who once believed these were just aggressive dogs owned by a stubborn old man now stood in silence, facing a truth they couldn't deny. Nobody said a word. But Lily's eyes, sharp under the falling snow, shone with something fierce. A quiet challenge. "Anyone else need me to prove it again?" A sudden gust of wind kicked up a swirl of snow across the yard. The dogs stayed frozen in position. Lily stood still in the center, her gaze steady on the town officials. She had spent months preparing for this moment. And now it was unfolding like the final movement in a symphony. But there was one thing she hadn't prepared for. Behind the wooden fence, Caleb lifted a hand to his chest. He thought it was just a twitch. A little jolt, the kind he'd felt before. But this one didn't fade. It spread fast, like a wave crashing against his ribs. His forehead broke out in a sudden sweat. His fingers gripped the wooden post for balance. Dana was the first to see it. She began, but didn't finish. Caleb collapsed. No shout, no dramatic crash, just a familiar body crumpling quietly, like an old tree finally surrendering to a storm. "Caleb!" Janet screamed, sprinting toward him. The sound was sharp enough to break the stillness. The dogs leapt to their feet. Lily spun around. The sight of the one person she loved most dropping to the ground hit like a thunderclap. But she didn't scream. She didn't freeze. She raised her arm. One command. Titan flew forward, that big, once uncontrollable dog abandoned for being too strong, too wild, now moved like lightning. He reached Caleb and used his body to shield him from the wind. Then, pressing one massive paw to the man's chest, he began CPR. Down. Release. Down. Release. Each push caused Caleb's chest to jolt slightly. This wasn't instinct. This had been trained. At the same time, Luna darted away like a silver arrow. She circled around the house, slipping through the dog flap where Caleb always kept the emergency kit in the low cupboard. No one had ever taught her to unlock it, but Lily had. With her hands, with her eyes, with her trust. In 30 seconds, Luna reappeared, clutching a small white box between her jaws. The label read, "Nitroglycerin, emergency use only." Dana whispered, stunned, How do they know?" Janet grabbed the box, hands shaking as she pulled it open and placed a pill beneath Caleb's tongue. Lily had reached him now, kneeling beside him. She watched Titan continue the compressions, then turned to Luna, who had now curled beside Caleb's chest, providing warmth. Everything was happening just as she had planned. Not a single step out of place. One dog guarded his heart. One dog brought his medicine. And in the middle of the whipping wind, a little girl held everything together. The camera was still rolling, but no one was thinking about the lens anymore. This wasn't a drill. It wasn't a demonstration. This was real. Life or death. Caleb let out a faint breath. His eyes fluttered open. A soft, barely there groan slipped from his lips. Janet pressed her ear to his chest. Heartbeat. It's back. Faint, but steady. Dana clutched her mouth, stunned by what she had just witnessed. Rachel stood frozen, her eyes locked on Titan not as a big, dangerous dog anymore, but as a guardian, loyal to the last breath. Lily didn't cry. She rested her hand gently over Caleb's chest, eyes watching every fragile breath. She had lost everything once. She wasn't going to let it happen again. Caleb couldn't speak, but his hand twitched, reaching for something. Lily took it. She understood. That was his thank you. Not spoken in words, but in the fragile spark of life being pulled back second by second, by the ones the world had once cast aside. And by a little girl the world had almost forgotten. It all lasted just a few minutes. But for everyone there, time felt like it had frozen inside the winter wind. Caleb lay on the cold ground, collar soaked in sweat. His hand still gripped Lily's tiny, trembling, but steady like the overcast sky holding the snow just a little longer. Titan stayed close, eyes locked on Caleb's chest, tracking every breath. Luna curled up against his ribs, her body braced to block the wind. The others stood in formation around them, unmoving, focused, a living wall. Just like all those late-night drills under the weak beam of a flashlight. Only now, it was real. Dana Fuller stood in the middle of the yard, eyes glassy with tears, unable to write another word. Janet checked Caleb's pulse, murmuring, "He's okay. Just needs oxygen now." But Rachel Simmons, still not fully shedding her doubts, stepped forward. Her voice wavered. "We can't allow dogs to stay this close to a medical emergency. It could violate safety protocol. It might—" "Don't!" The word rang out like a cracked bell through the silence. Everyone turned. Lily Harper, the girl who hadn't spoken in nearly a year, now stood in the center of a circle of adults, face streaked with dirt, eyes glistening with tears, voice cutting through the forest edge. Don't push them away!" she shouted, her voice raw and trembling. "They're saving him! They are saving—" The words shattered like her once broken heart. But inside that shatter there was something stronger than anyone had seen before, a fire born of loss, of silence, and the courage to finally speak when no one else had ever done it for her. Rachel stepped back. Then another step. Dana leaned toward Janet, whispering, "That's the first time I've heard her speak." "No," Janet said, still watching Lily. "It's the first time the whole town has truly listened." Lily knelt beside Caleb, wrapped her arms around Luna, then gently stroked Titan's back like she was telling him, You did good." Her tears fell, not out of fear, but out of the fierce knowing that, for the first time ever, she had stood up for something, spoken out for someone, protected life. No more reports were needed, no more evaluations. That day, no one questioned the dogs again. No one asked about safety checks or paperwork. Because a man had survived, not because of a nurse, not a doctor, but because of trust and training born of love and the scream of a little girl in the middle of winter. The scream of a girl named Lily Harper. And from that day forward, nobody called them Caleb's dogs anymore. They were known by a new name, Lily's Response Unit. After the town inspection, Caleb's cabin looked a little neater than usual. Janet and a few folks from Cedar Ridge had started dropping by to check in on him. And Lily, well, she barely left the back door. Every day she came by, her little notebook in hand, talking to the dogs now not just with her eyes and hands, but with words, too. That morning, Mrs. Ellison brought over some fruit and a jar of orange marmalade. Things she knew Caleb liked, but rarely prepared for himself. Mr. Harper followed behind her, carrying a bag of warm winter clothes in case Caleb needed them. In the living room, Mrs. Ellison accidentally knocked over Caleb's old leather wallet that had been sitting on the low table. A few folded papers scattered prescriptions, an insurance card, and one small photo, its corners faded and soft. She bent down, picked it up, and the moment her fingers touched the picture, her breath caught. In the photo, a young Caleb stood beside a couple both young, full of light. The woman had long hair and radiant eyes. The man was tall, holding a little girl, maybe 1 year old, in his arms. "Howard," she whispered, trembling as she handed the picture to her husband. Mr. Harper took it. His face was drained of color. On the back of the photo, still legible through the smudged ink, were the words, "Robert, Sarah, Lily, final farewell day. Captain Brooks, 2018. They looked at each other, stunned, hearts aching, slowly beginning to understand. That photo wasn't just a memory. It was an answer. One they'd been too afraid to ask out loud. Why did Caleb care about Lily so much? Why did he stay nearby, silently watching over her without ever being asked? It wasn't a coincidence, and it wasn't a pity. It was because, once, he had been part of their lives. That afternoon, the Ellisons visited Caleb again, the photo still in hand. His small room was washed in gentle winter light, the kind that feels more like a quiet blessing than sunshine. Caleb sat propped against a pillow, blanket over his lap, eyes gazing out the window where the dogs lay sprawled in the gold of the fading sun. "You knew them, didn't you?" Mr. Harper asked, his voice soft like old wood creaking. Caleb didn't answer right away. He blinked slowly, then nodded. "I was the first one on the scene," he said, his voice like dry leaves rustling. "I led the first response team that day. The road was slick. Car lost control, veered off the stone bridge along Route 6. Snow was falling." He paused, catching his breath. "I remember, the headlights scattered across the water, and crying, so faint, behind the cracked windshield. The baby, she was still breathing, still alive." Mr. Harper clutched the photo tighter. Mrs. Ellison wiped her eyes. Caleb kept going, every word pulled from a place deep and long buried. "I pulled her out first, her mom, Sarah. She didn't have much time left, but she looked right at me. Her hand is still gripping the back seat. She didn't ask about herself. She just whispered, 'The baby. Please, help her.'" Caleb's old eyes reddened. He turned his face slightly away, as though afraid someone might see what he had kept hidden all these years. "I made her a promise," he said. "Right there, in the snow, I swore I wouldn't let that little girl be alone." And he had kept that promise, not with grand gestures or public speeches, but with a quiet life lived in the background, buying a piece of land close to where the Ellisons took Lily in, taking in a pack of dogs no one wanted to build a safe space, and waiting, patiently, until the little girl who once sat in a crushed car seat would, one day, walk to the fence on her own and reach out her hand toward a creature that knew how to love. Caleb leaned back deeper into his pillow, eyes half closed as if memory itself was rewinding in perfect clarity. The snowy morning, the broken glass, the screaming wind. "The car was upside down off the ridge," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "Smoke was curling out of the hood, glass was everywhere. 3 of us had to use crowbars just to get to the back." He stopped, drawing a breath that felt like it had to come from somewhere far away. "When I finally got inside, I saw 2 adults. The man, unresponsive. His head had hit the column. And her, Sarah, she was pinned in the front seat, her waist crushed into the twisted frame. There was so much blood I thought she was already gone." Caleb's eyes weren't in the room anymore. They were back there, on that icy road, at the moment everything changed forever. But then, she opened her eyes. Barely. She looked at me, not with fear, not panic, just one thing, one emotion, worry for her child. His hand gently touched his chest, almost unconsciously, like he could still feel the grip from that moment. I told her, "We'll get you out, you're safe." But she didn't care about herself. All she asked was, "Where's the baby?" He paused again, and for the first time, a single tear slipped from his closed eye, quiet and heavy with sorrow. "I heard crying, very faint. Lily was alive. I told Sarah her baby was okay. And she grabbed my hand, so tight." Caleb turned to face the Ellisons, revealing something he had never spoken aloud in nearly a decade. "You're the first person she'll see when she wakes up." Sarah said that, then whispered, "Promise me you won't let her grow up alone." And I did. That promise spoken in the final breath of a dying mother needed no signature, no official seal. It just needed a heart that still believed in keeping its word. And Caleb kept it, with silence. By staying close, but never intruding. By raising a pack of dogs, not to protect himself, but to build a haven, a shelter, a home for a girl who would need it all her childhood. And one day, without ever knowing the story, she came and reached her hand through the fence. Ever since that final inspection, Caleb hadn't stepped outside. He spent most of his days in his familiar wooden room where morning light spilled across the floor and the soft scent of dry straw drifted in each evening. The dogs, as if they understood, took turns lying quietly by his bed. They weren't guarding anymore. They were saying goodbye. And Caleb knew it. His body didn't lie to him anymore. The pain in his chest stayed longer now, deeper and colder than before. Some mornings it took him several minutes just to sit up, and every step felt like a silent war between willpower and a body slowly letting go. He didn't say anything to Lily. She still came every afternoon, reading through training notes, jotting down improvements in her little notebook, and telling him about each dog's progress. Luna had started turning her back gently whenever someone crouched down nearby. Titan could now tell apart 2 types of whistles. Juno had learned to carry items on cue with just a soft whistle. Caleb listened closely, like a father listening to his daughter describe the world he once built, now moving on without him. Some mornings, he'd wake earlier than everyone else, not to watch the sunrise, but to take one last look at the life he'd built through his eyes, through his memories. The dogs were strong now, grown, steady. And Lily Lily wasn't the silent little girl by the fence anymore. She was a leader, a pillar, the new heartbeat of the pack. But most importantly, he had kept his promise. The one he made to a dying mother in the snow that her child would never grow up alone. And now, not only had he kept it, he had given Lily something greater than safety. He'd given her a place to belong. Caleb knew his time was short, but instead of fear, he felt peace. No one lives forever. But if even a piece of your memory, a sliver of your love, a thread of your hope continues on in someone else, then death isn't the end. It's just a quiet step back, so someone else can walk forward. That evening, Caleb sat at the old wooden desk by the window. In front of him was a blank sheet of paper, a fountain pen with a worn nib, and the leather notebook Lily had given him last year, but he had never used. The moon that night was full and bright. Its silver light cut through the window, casting Titan's silhouette across the floor where he lay watch by the porch. Luna was curled up at the foot of the bed. The whole house seemed to fall silent, holding its breath for a letter. Lily, by the time you read this, I might not have enough breath left to say things out loud, but I believe you understand. There are some truths that don't need to be spoken to be real. Like love, quiet, steady, and asking for nothing in return. You came to this place as a quiet shadow, more silent than the forest night. But then you reached out and touched Luna. And somehow, in that moment, you brought back the heartbeat of a place I thought had died the day Blaze passed. And the day my wife did too. You didn't just teach these dogs obedience. You taught them to listen, to wait, to offer loyalty not out of command, but out of love. And you taught me, an old grump stuck in the past, living with ghosts, how to believe in tomorrow again. Lily, this isn't a training ground anymore. This is a home for creatures who were once forgotten, and for children who once felt broken. So I want you to keep going. Start a center, a place where people and animals can heal each other, a place that doesn't need much paperwork, but does need a lot of patience, gentleness, and eyes like yours the first time you looked at Juno. I've left a little money tucked away in the bottom drawer, under that blue cloth you used to dry off Zeus's paws. It's not much, but it's enough to begin. Janet and Mrs. Harper know. They'll help you. Call it whatever you like. But me? I always liked the sound of the hallway of light, a place where people step out of darkness and still find their way home. And the dogs? They're your family now. You understand every breath they take. You've taught them more than I ever did. Don't hesitate to give them real responsibilities. And don't forget, you are one of them too. Strong, loyal, and brave enough to walk straight through fear. Lily, I never had children of my own. But if anyone ever asks, I'll tell them this. I once had a girl named Lily, and she saved my life. With all my love, Caleb Walker, former firefighter, and the man who kept a promise to a mother in her final breath. He folded the letter, carefully slipping it into a brown envelope marked in faded ink. For Lily, when I'm no longer here. He placed it in the drawer by his bed, beneath Blaze's old collar and the beige cloth he'd once used to tend Titan's first wound. Then he turned off the light. The night was quiet. In the dark, he smelled something familiar, the scent of dry straw, the faint musk of dog fur, and something deeper than time itself. Peace. That night, Cedar Ridge turned strangely cold. No snow fell, and no wind howled, yet the silence settled heavy, like the whole world was holding its breath for something sacred. Inside that little wooden room, Caleb had gone to bed earlier than usual. There was no pain. Not this time. None of the sharp pangs he'd grown used to. Just a gentle weariness, like even his body knew it was time to let go. He lay still, eyes closed, breath thin as mist. Luna was the first to notice. She had been resting at the foot of the bed when she stood and quietly padded closer. She nuzzled her head against his hand. He didn't move, not much, but his fingers curled ever so slightly like a final squeeze. A soft whine broke the silence, not a bark from Titan by the door. One by one, the dogs came into the room. No one called them. No signal. They just knew. They all knew. Zeus lay beside the bed, head up, standing guard. Athena settled at the foot of the bed, eyes unblinking, watching Caleb's chest rise and fall, as if counting each breath. Apollo and Titan took their places near the door, blocking the way out like loyal sentries. And Luna, the gentlest, the most loyal, never left his chest, resting her head over the blanket that lay across his heart. She could feel those last heartbeats through the fabric. The room felt like a ceremony without candles. No tears, no whispers. Just moonlight filtering in through the window, casting its glow over 14 creatures once deemed unworthy, now serving as the silent honor guard for the man who had saved each of them. Sometime near midnight, Caleb exhaled. Longer than before. Then he didn't breathe again. No jerking, no thrashing, he just left. And at that moment, every single dog lowered their heads. No one said a word. No one howled or barked. They simply bowed, one final ritual for the man who had rescued them from death and obscurity. The next morning, when Lily arrived, she stepped into the wooden room and froze at the threshold. The sight hit her like a weight to the chest. Caleb lay still, his face peaceful, like he'd just drifted into a nap. The envelope rested on the nightstand. Around him, the dogs sat in solemn formation, quiet and reverent, forming a sacred circle. Lily didn't cry right away. She walked to his side, sat down, and gently placed her hand over his, still warm. A few minutes passed. Then Luna stepped forward, carrying in her mouth the old cloth Caleb always used. That's when Lily opened the letter. Her eyes blurred for just a second, and when she reached the line that said, "Keep going. Build that place. Call it whatever you want. Just don't let anyone ever feel like they're alone." She lifted her head and looked out across the yard, where the first rays of sunlight stretched across the porch, lighting up everything Caleb had planted and left behind. Lily nodded. "I'll do it, Grandpa," she whispered, her voice steady now. "I promise." That morning, the sun rose a little later than usual, or maybe it just felt that way. For Lily, time itself seemed to stretch thin and silent from the moment Caleb took his last breath to the first light creeping through the wooden window. It was like falling into a space between seconds, a place with no edges, no sound, and nothing solid to hold on to. She sat there alone in the room, surrounded by a quiet circle of 14 dogs' souls, who now had no familiar leader to look to. Lily didn't cry anymore. She had cried through the night. But when the sunlight slipped across the floorboards, she understood something that went beyond grief. Some things shouldn't just be honored with tears. They should be carried forward with action. She reached over and opened the drawer by the bed, the place Caleb kept everything that mattered. An old envelope, the handwriting still clear in faded blue ink. For Lily, when I'm gone. Lily unfolded the letter. "Lily, if you're reading this, I've finished my part of the journey, and now it's your turn. You once asked why the dogs obeyed me so well, why one small gesture or a glance was enough. The truth is simple. They didn't follow me because I was strong. They followed because I was someone they trusted to lead. Now that person is not me anymore. It's you. You're the one they've chosen. Not because you shout, not because you demand, but because you listen. You understand. You love without asking for anything in return. To a dog, that's the highest language there is. I watched you every night, teaching Luna with just your eyes, calming Titan with a single tilt of your head, comforting Apollo when he trembled in his sleep. I saw it all. And I know this deep down. No one, not even me, has ever understood them like you do." Lily paused. Her fingers clutched the letter tight. Luna scooted closer, gently resting her head against Lily's knee, like she knew every word was true. Lily kept reading. "From now on, you're their leader. Not just of the dogs, but of something bigger. A mission. A mother once gave up her last breath asking for one thing, that her daughter wouldn't grow up alone. I did what I could. But now, you've grown. You don't need someone to walk you through it anymore. You are the one others will follow. I don't have much to leave behind. But if you look around, you'll see it. My legacy is those dogs. And it's you. They'll listen to you. But what matters most is what you choose to do with that. Don't keep them just to protect yourself. Take them to those who need to be saved. To children who've never been hugged. To adults who've forgotten how to trust. To trembling souls like Luna once was. These dogs don't just know how to fight, they know how to heal. Just like you." Lily looked up. The room was empty of Caleb, but not of him. He was still there in every word, in every breath that lingered near Blaze's old collar hanging by the door, in Zeus's silent gaze as he sat waiting, as if for his next command. Lily folded the letter. Carefully, reverently, like sealing away a piece of someone's soul. She stood, walked to the door. And every one of the 14 dogs stood with her. No whistles, no hand signals. They just knew. The new leader was ready. A week after Caleb's funeral, Lily returned to the little wooden house that had once been the heart of the farm. No more fresh flowers. No white cloth draped across the doorway. Everything had been cleaned and cleared. But in that quiet simplicity, Lily felt something loud and alive. This place wasn't meant to be a memorial. It needed to keep living. The dogs were still here, all 14 of them. As if nothing had been lost, they still worked each day, raising a paw when Lily gave the signal, barking softly when a stranger approached the gate, lying still and watchful when she sat writing in her notebook. But Lily's notebook wasn't just a training log anymore. It had sketches, plans, a full map of the land, the main kennel, the training yard, the little wooden house, and something new, drawn faintly at the bottom of the page. A structure not yet built. A dream. One afternoon, after a session running group drills with Luna and Juno, Lily sat on the porch with a warm mug of cocoa in her hands. Janet showed up, gently placing a cardboard box beside her. "This is a land survey Caleb submitted to the town council," she said. "He left a note with it. Southern field reserved for a future animal therapy center. Request land use reclassification." Lily opened the box. Inside was a key to an old storage shed and a rough, unfinished draft with bold handwriting across the top. "Project, the safe place." She looked at Janet, then down at the dogs lying near the gate. And she understood. Caleb hadn't just left behind a dream. He had already started sketching it out long ago. That night, Lily sat on the wooden floor with Caleb's old whiteboard in front of her, the same one he used for training sessions. She picked up a black marker and wrote the first line at the top. The Haven Project. Haven, a place of shelter. Not just for dogs, not just for children, but for anyone carrying a pain too heavy to name. 2 months later, at the back of the kennel grounds, the first sounds of building echoed through the air saws, hammers, voices calling to one another. At first, the town held back, uncertain. But then, slowly, one by one, people began to show up. Mr. Miller brought lumber. Dr. Elena offered medical support. A group of students volunteered to paint murals on the walls. Lily didn't bark orders. She led. She organized work shifts like assigning group exercises. She whistled, and the dogs brought tools. And when she sketched the layout of the first hallway, the one where the beds for special needs kids would be, the whole team stood silently, watching like they were witnessing something sacred. 1 week before the grand opening, Lily sat down to write the center's first rules. No one here is a stranger. If you're scared, speak softly. If you can't speak, let our dogs understand you. Here, no one gets left behind. On opening day, the sky was calm and clear. A new wooden sign hung above the main gate, carved with steady, loving hands. The Haven Project Animal Therapy and Emotional Recovery Center, because every wound deserves to heal. Children from around the region began walking through the gate. Some clutched stuffed animals, some came alone, wide-eyed with fear. But when they saw Luna lying by the steps, bowing her head gently to welcome them, they slowed down. Lily greeted them one by one. She didn't ask too much. She didn't press. She simply held out her hand and let the dogs do the rest. Zeus walked beside the kids battling depression. Athena showed them how to play silent signal games. Juno sat quietly, letting children stroke her fur without needing to say a single word. No one was pushed to heal. Because healing is a journey. And at the Haven Project, that journey begins with a single glance, a steady breath, and a dog waiting by your side. That night, Lily sat on the front steps, holding her first notebook in her lap. The moon hung high above. The dogs lay scattered around her, their tails gently tapping against the wooden floor. She opened her notebook and wrote a new line. "I did it, Grandpa Caleb. But this isn't the end. This is the place where my voice will never go quiet again." A full year had passed since the Haven Project first opened its doors. Nestled quietly among the whispering pine-covered hills, the center had become an inseparable part of Cedar Ridge. Not that place where the old man kept stray dogs, like people used to say, but the place where children find themselves again. Every morning, the gates opened while the mist still clung low to the ground. Soft footsteps echoed along the stone path. Some kids came hand in hand with their grandparents. Others clutched tightly to the coat hems of their guardians. But all of them paused the moment the dogs emerged from the main kennel. They never rushed. They came out in small groups, one by one. Some stretched with a long yawn. Some tilted their heads, gently scanning the faces of the children like they were reading a mood before making a move. They understood. Not every child who arrived here was ready to hold someone or be held. Many carried deep scars inside. Some came after accidents, some after violence, some after nights of being left behind, with no one who believed them. At the Haven Project, no one asked, "What's your name?" or "What happened to you?" Here, the first question was, "Which dog would you like to sit beside?" There was a little curly-haired girl, 8 years old, who hadn't spoken a word since the fire. Now she gently whispered, "Zeus," every morning. A 12-year-old boy who once panicked in the dark now walked calmly through the hallway no lights, just as long as Luna walked with him. At the Haven Project, healing wasn't a command. It was understanding delivered through eyes, through paws, through a soft lick on the wrist. No comforting speeches, no forced advice. Just one thing every child was gently taught. You don't have to be strong right away, but you won't be alone. Therapy sessions were held in small groups called circles of trust. Each circle had a lead child, once a participant, now a guide who showed the new ones how to stroke a dog's ear gently, how to give the sit signal with just a look. not a shout. No one was ever pushed to speak. But over the weeks, one by one, the kids started to find their voices in their own way. A name softly called across a field. A giggle when a dog knocked over the crayons. A quiet, whispered dream told to Luna beneath the stars. The Haven didn't hand out certificates. No diplomas hung on its walls. But every child who left carried something no piece of paper could ever measure. The ability to trust again. One mother, tears in her eyes, once said, "I thought I'd lost my daughter forever. But then, she started telling me stories about Titan. She said he used to be afraid of thunder, and that if Titan could face it, maybe she could too." Cedar Ridge had once been reserved, skeptical, unsure of anything labeled therapy. But now, whenever the cold season rolled in, people began knitting tiny wool scarves, each one lovingly made for a specific dog. Gifts from children who once felt invisible. And beneath that blanket of winter snow, the Haven Project kept quietly working. Healing one paw at a time. Every paw step across the training yard no longer felt like routine patrol. They were proof of something quietly growing day by day. Hope. It was a Thursday afternoon. The sun slanted gently through the maple trees near the therapy wing. On the flat stone ground, 14 kids sat in a soft half-circle, each beside a dog. Some scratched furry ears. Some rested their hands lightly on a warm back. The rest simply sat in still silence, as if listening to a language with no words. At the center stood Lily Harper, 12 years old. Her hair was tied low behind her neck. She wore a faded brown t-shirt and soft work pants. In her hand was a well-worn notebook. Her eyes held that rare balance between kindness and command. She didn't hold a mic. She didn't need one. Her voice was just loud enough for everyone to hear, and gentle enough not to disturb any soul still piecing itself back together. "Today's lesson," she began, "doesn't start with a command. It starts with distance." She stepped toward Luna, who was lying beside a messy-haired boy who'd only been at the center for 2 weeks. "Distance is the very first thing any hurt creature needs to have respected," she said. "We usually want to help right away, to move in close, but you can't help someone unless they let you." She sat down, one arm's length from Luna. "Watch closely. Luna's not making eye contact. She's breathing steady, but her ears are low. That means, I'm not ready yet." Lily lifted her right hand, just halfway, just enough for Luna to notice. "I wait, I don't touch, I don't call, I don't push." And then, in a moment that seemed so small and yet meant everything, Luna lifted her head and gently touched her nose to Lily's hand. A breath of understanding rippled across the circle. "That's consent," Lily smiled. "A yes that comes from the body." She turned to the kids seated farther back. "Building trust isn't about getting someone to believe you right away," she continued. "It's about giving them time to see that you're not going anywhere." A girl in a red jacket, one who hadn't taken off her mask for the entire first month, raised her hand just a little. "But what if we mess up?" Lily walked over and crouched down to the girl's eye level. "Then we fix it. With dogs, fixing things doesn't mean punishment. It means we try again. Slower, softer." And she told a story. "Once, I gave Titan the wrong signal, and he ran right into the fence. I cried, but he didn't get mad. He just came back, laid his head on my knee like he was saying, 'Want to try again?'" The kids looked around at each other. No one told them they had to believe. But through shared glances, small nods, and soft hands resting gently on furry shoulders, something was blooming. Acceptance. Lily stood up, brushed the dust from her pants. "We're gonna do today's practice in pairs," she said. "One of you is the person, the other, the dog." A burst of giggles escaped. Not loud, but enough to float across the yard like the wind caught it. "No, no barking," Lily laughed with them. "It's just to help us feel what it's like when someone gets close, and you're not ready yet." As the sun began to dip behind the trees, Lily gathered the notebooks and gave a soft whistle. The dogs stood up in line. No chaos, no names called. They just knew. The kids stood, too, waving goodbye to one another. A few walked up to Lily, quietly extending their hands, not asking for anything, but thanking her. And Lily knew. Trust wasn't something you built overnight. It was laid, one quiet brick at a time. With a glance, a gesture, a dog's nose nudging a trembling hand that once flinched at human touch. Evening light spilled over Cedar Ridge like golden syrup, honey-colored and soft, soaking into the rooftops and pine-covered hills. The breeze carried a far-off sound from town, once a warning bell. Now, it was a call. A call from people heading toward the Haven Project, not because they needed help, but because they wanted to be part of something. Just a year ago, folks were still arguing about how many dogs could be kept on one plot of land. Now, they were showing up with paintbrushes, food, or simply an open heart. Now, the town itself has rewritten the ordinance, expanding the designated community therapy zone. They hung up new wooden signs, planted trees, and cleared paths to make the center more accessible for wheelchairs. People no longer looked at the German shepherds with suspicion. They looked with quiet respect. In the small plaza next to the church, a new statue had been raised, a dog sitting upright, gaze steady, eyes forward alert, steadfast and deeply human. At the base of the statue, a line was carved, "Guardians of Cedar Ridge," because protectors don't always wear uniforms. Back at the center, Lily sat on the familiar wooden steps, a warm cup of tea nestled in her palms. In front of her stood the formation of 14 dogs, now older, calmer. A few were beginning to show their age. Athena's eyes had begun to cloud. Zeus limped slightly on his back leg, but none of them had lost the gaze of a soldier. They were no longer referred to as therapy dogs. People simply called them one thing now: the guards. Not guards against enemies, but guardians of fragile memories, of hearts still too scared to open, of children who needed a safe place to speak their first word. Each afternoon, like a quiet ritual, the dogs would form a circle in the yard, sitting in stillness. No barking, no whining, not even looking at one another. They looked at Lily, not waiting for a command, but waiting for something deeper. Presence. And Lily, the girl who once stood outside the fence, silently watching, was now at the very heart of that circle. Not because she was the trainer, but because she was the heartbeat of this place. Cedar Ridge hadn't changed through posters or newsletters. It had changed through the smallest things. A little girl who used to hide under the table now runs out to hug Athena whenever thunder rolls. An elderly widow who comes each evening to read books aloud for Juno. A teenage boy fresh from rehab who now volunteers to clean kennels and practice silent hand signals. These changes weren't loud. They didn't shout. They breathed, quietly like the dogs lying around Lily, protectors and witnesses to something sacred taking root. Life could be harsh, but here, in this quiet corner of Cedar Ridge, a girl who once had no voice was now helping others find theirs. No shouting, no speeches, just a circle of loyal dogs, silent sentries of the soul. And when night fell, Lily stepped out from the wooden porch and looked up at the deep black sky, now glistening with stars. She whispered softly, "I'm still keeping my promise, Grandpa Caleb. And now I know that promise wasn't just for me, it was for this whole town." Sunset always arrived later in Cedar Ridge, as if even the sun hesitated to leave, not wanting to interrupt whatever quiet magic was unfolding here. The sky burned deep orange with streaks of indigo, stretching from the hillside down to the rooftops of the Haven Project. A soft breeze swept through the freshly trimmed grass fields, carrying the scent of pine and the faint chime of tiny bells hanging by the gate. The children had all gone home. The dust along the stone path drifted like mist and faded into the air. A few of the dogs still lay half asleep in the yard. Athena, resting her head on a curly-haired boy's legs, Juno chasing one last training loop just for the joy of it. But the moment was not noisy. It was silent, like a gentle goodbye. Days at this place never ended with bells or loudspeakers. They ended with sunlight slanting across the dogs' backs and the quiet departure of children walking just a little taller than when they arrived. The wooden gate creaked shut. One last glance over the shoulder. A distant wave from a small hand. High above, a dark-colored kite circled lazily, watching over the place from the sky, much like the eyes that once guarded it, no longer seen, but never gone. Sunset wrapped around the Haven Project like an embrace, gentle, full, and sacred. As the last light dipped behind the ridge, Lily stepped off the main yard, her footsteps slow and steady along a narrow dirt path heading west toward a small rise blanketed in soft grass and wild lavender. Titan walked beside her without a leash. They hadn't needed one for a long time. That spot higher than anywhere else on the property was where Caleb used to sit. A weathered wooden chair, tilted slightly forward as if bowing to the world, remained untouched. Beside it, a worn log where Titan always lay. Lily sat down, her back resting against the legs of the chair. Titan lay beside her, head gently placed on her shoe, just like he had that very first day. They didn't speak, but in the silence, 100 things were said without words. From here, the entire center unfolded like a living painting below. The U-shaped training field, the wooden house nestled among white daisies, and beyond that, the carved fence row honoring dogs who had passed. Names like Blaze, Luna, and Max etched into the wood. Lily looked up at the blazing red sky, her eyes no longer filled with fear like in the early days. She was no longer the girl hiding behind the fence, peeking through vines, waiting for someone to come close. She no longer had to stay quiet, so no one would notice her. Now she was the one sitting on the highest point, looking down just like Caleb used to. But the difference was, she wasn't alone. Titan nudged her elbow gently, as if to say for Caleb, "It's your turn now." The story of Lily, Caleb, and the German shepherds wasn't just one of healing. It was living proof of the power of pure love, a love that transcends words, pain, and the past. These dogs, once dismissed as useless or dangerous, became teachers, companions, and silent sentinels guarding the human spirit. German shepherds, strong, loyal, and brilliantly intelligent, weren't just born to protect. They were born to connect. Between them and us lies a thread invisible, but stronger than any spoken vow. And the Haven Project? It is not just a therapy center. It is a reminder. Even if you have been broken, you can still become a safe place for someone else. To love animals is to open your heart. And when the heart opens, no one gets left behind. Because wherever there is trust, there is a miracle waiting.